Hey everybody, how's everybody doing today? Welcome to my Sunday live stream where we talk about photography and catch up, see how everybody's doing in the community. And sorry, I just got home like maybe 15, 20 minutes ago from basically shooting all day long, mostly driving because all these places are, gosh, so far away. Um, so I'm a little bit exhausted. If my voice is tired, it's because I've been kind of talking pretty much all day too. But, yeah, the stream is, late today because I had to host, the photo club this morning, and, yeah, so I didn't get a lot of great pictures for myself as usual. I'm usually helping other people while I'm in the field, in the photo club, which I love to do. I can always take pictures anytime, but, getting together with people and talking about photography and helping people that need help is really the best thing about it. And not sure why the chat section over here is not working. Uh, let me see what. Yeah, everything looks right. So sorry about that. For those of you that watch the stream later and like to see the chat like right away, unfortunately, it's not coming up today for some reason. Um, Let me try one more time before we get any further. I'm just gonna try one more time to get that to work. What can I do here? I know I have the right. Yeah, everything looks right. Let me try this. Okay. It works, but it's tiny. Let me try one more thing here. Ah, there we go. All right, good. So I hope you guys can see that now over here. Because the chat section, like in real time on YouTube, can take a day or two sometimes for it to show up, and it's frustrating for those of you that like to watch shortly after I do the stream. And during the stream, if you're watching on TV or on your cell phone, it's easier to see the chat when it's nicely blocked off to the side here. And it's easier for me to see as well, more or less. But I see lots of people here. I see Darko, good to see you, and Bon and Seraphin. Semjon, Intrigue. Oh, Intrigue, how you doing? I just got home myself. I met Intrigue there for the first time in person, and he's been a long time viewer. So it's great to meet you in person finally, and get to chat a little bit and do some photography together. And he'll tell you I'm pretty much the same person, like in real life, as I am here on the stream. What you see is what you get, more or less. So I invite you, if you guys are local, to come out to any of the photo walks in the Virginia Photography Club on Meetup. I met a lot of people this weekend that recognized me. I didn't know them, but they knew me, uh, which is unusual. Most of the year goes by, I don't run into anybody that knows me from online. But uh, what was great though is I saw so many Olympus shooters out there and Micro Four Thirds shooters. Intrigue had his Panasonic, which was really cool to see, with a great setup, the 12 to 60 lens, G9 Mark II, etc. So many great cameras. And I went to a show, uh, the Nature something, that David Crooks, who normally hosts the photo meetups, was actually speaking and talking about AI and photography. So that was really interesting. I learned a few new things, and David is a fantastic photographer and very knowledgeable. I'm not sure if he's in here today or not, but anywho, what I wanted to talk about is a little bit about the 150 to 400. I got a chance. I'm a little dehydrated. I need to. This is the coffee I made before I left. Like, gosh, like 10 hours ago. I'll take a break in a little bit and get some water or something. But yeah, so I met up with Ben Chappell from the Narrowband channel, and he had on loan from Mike Amico, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, Mike, the 150 to 400. And it was also a good chance to go up and see Ben. He's about 2.5 hours away from me, in terms of driving. So it's really just a day trip for me, but it's still quite a bit of hike. But it was good to see Ben and uh, get a chance to try out the new lens on my OM1 Mark One, and I'm still on the previous firmware. I haven't updated to the new one yet. I keep promising I'm going to do that. Eventually, I'll get around to it. um, but I was thoroughly impressed with that lens, and I can appreciate why they're charging so much for it, because the best lens that I have is the 300 millimeter f4, which is the knees bees, so to speak, like the old angry photographer used to say. And it's really a terrific lens, but the 150 to 400 is just a whole different lens. I wouldn't say it's on a whole different level. 300 f4 is pretty amazing, but it does seem to have just a little bit extra something. And let me put a link to the I only had an hour there really with the lens, and probably less than that in terms of actual shooting time, because we were walking most of the time trying to find something to take a picture of. Because it's about a mile walk on that one particular trail. We were on the one side of the trail, and we walked most of it and only stopped a few times where there were some birds. So I put a link in the over here to my Flickr page that has the my keepers, so to speak, the images that I decided to show that I took with this lens. And all of the EXIF data is there, and you can pixel peep, you can download them if you want for your own personal use, if you want to inspect those. And I took everything with the 1.4 teleconverter attached. Sometimes I use the lens's internal teleconverter. It has its own like 1.25, I think. And it has, but it had the 1.4 teleconverter attached to it, which gives me an effective reach of 1400 millimeters. So it's 700 millimeters in actual focal length. And with our Micro Four Thirds camera, it's equivalent 1400 millimeters. And I was at f8 if we go all the way out to 1400 millimeters. And the sun was setting. The sun sets like a little after 6 p.m. And so we started shooting around 5 p.m. So, the sun was pretty much gone most of the time, but I did get a few shots, but they were all pretty much at high ISO. That said, when you look at the images, you'll see that I use DxO to get rid of all the noise and sharpening and all of that stuff. So they still came out pretty good. So let me go over a couple of them together with you. And so I need to rearrange my screens a little bit. Okay. All right. Hold on. Does that look right? No. There. That looks right. So we'll start here. And again, this link I just put down. So if you go to any of these images, you can see down here the EXIF data. So this was with the internal teleconverter and external, separate teleconverter MC14, giving me a 700 millimeter focal length. And I was at ISO 1250, and it's just a squirrel. But you can zoom in and pixel peep these. Like I said, if I do this during the stream, it's not going to be as nice as you looking at it directly on your own screen. To give you an idea of just the kind of overall sharpness. So this is really impressive considering we got two teleconverters going on at the same time. And this squirrel was pretty far away. Uh, And this duck, the same thing. Let's see. I don't think I was quite zoomed in on. Oh, I was at 700 millimeters again. ISO 2500. And like I said, if you just punch in all the way, and this was cropped a little bit as well, you can see just how much detail and color and contrast, the micro contrast, whatever. It's just really amazing. Now, again, I did process these with DxOs, so it's not the straight out of camera raw. But still, even that the raw image itself was pretty impressive to be able to pull out this kind of detail. I attribute that to both, the lens, of course, the OM1 sensor, and the processing I did with DxO Photolab 8. So I highly recommend all of those to you. If you want like the ultimate reach and wildlife type setup, of course, I don't think there's anything better out there. This one is a really good demonstration of the kind of color and contrast you can pull out of the raw images and together with this lens, even with the 1.4x teleconverter. I wish I had more time to test and compare shots side by side with my 300 millimeter, but there just really wasn't enough time. And this image here also at ISO 1250. And look at the shutter speed. This is the other thing. Uh, I'm at, how do I get my face off of this? I'm at 1/125th of a second at 700 millimeters. So this also is a testament to the image stabilization and synced image stabilization that you get between the OM1 and this lens, with all of this going on at the full 700 millimeter focal length. Now, granted, I was using a monopod, so this is not handheld. I was on a monopod, I think, for all of these shots, except for maybe that duck picture. Um, Let me see. I don't think, yeah, I think almost all of these I was on a monopod, so that's also contributing, right? This here is actually my favorite image of the set. I just felt this was such an elegant picture of Canadian geese. Excuse me. Excuse me. You know, this is my favorite. I don't think it got too much attention on Instagram or anything else, but this is at 1/1000th, and I was in shutter priority, ISO 4000, but I was only zoomed into the 560, so I was not using the internal teleconverter. I was using only the MC14. But again, this is insanely sharp, and the smoothness of the autofocus areas, this transition, the colors, everything is just fantastic. Really, really amazing. And then one of these images is really a high ISO. Let me see if it's in, like this one here. This image here is, take a guess what this image is at. This image is at like ISO, I think it was like 51,000. I'm at 1/500th of a second, uh, 469 millimeters. So again, a testament to the image stabilization and ISO performance and DxO processing. Look at the detail I was still able to pull out. Now, clearly, there is a little bit of smudging here in the feathers. But come on, ISO 51,000, and I still pulled out an acceptable picture, you know? At least, on an enthusiast level or hobbyist level, this is certainly acceptable. It's not going to win any prizes, obviously. This image here of the wood duck, this one was also very, very high ISO. This was like 32,000 ISO. Uh, you know, so at 1/1000th of a second, and this is at the full 700 millimeters. So all teleconverters engaged, zoomed all the way in. It's just freaking amazing. So let's see. Let me go back to the album. And this last one, I think this one was pretty normal. This was at ISO 6400, 358 millimeters. So clearly I didn't need the MC14 for a lot of these, but I can only imagine because when you add the 1.4 teleconverter, it does take a little edge off the sharpness of the image. It's just the way it is. But this is incredible detail at ISO 6400 with a teleconverter on this lens. And, they, I mean, if you could really zoom in even more on Flickr, you could see the reflection of me taking the duck's picture in the eye here. It's just that good. So definitely check those images out. I'm going to try and do a short video talking about this a little bit more uh, in detail and with a little better. I need to be a little more concise than like here when I'm talking live, right? Because talking live, I'm just kind of going off the cuff, and especially just coming back from an all-day shoot. I've been driving for hours and hours today and talking to people for hours and hours. It's been a long day already. So my voice is actually a little bit hoarse because I need to get some water. But yeah, so I did this in about an hour, and I think I can even show you a little bit of footage maybe. Let me check one other thing here before I get too much further. I want to do that. Okay. um, Let me pull up. I'm going to pull something up, a little bit of video footage that I captured while I was there. And Ben took a few clips as well. Actually, those I can pull up right away. Let me just go to that folder. And like I said, I'll try and put a short video together, compiling sort of some of the video clips and the images, because, probably 90% of the viewers on my channel don't watch my live streams, uh, but they'll watch a video, right, for 5 or 10 minutes. Let's see, it's on this drive down in here, buried 2024, fourth quarter. Um, I can just show you the screen I'm working on. But this will give you an idea of my workflow. So I have my work drive D, and then I go into a media folder, and this is where I have all my separate folders. So 2024, fourth quarter, and then the folders are named individually. If I don't do it right away, I come back and label them. Let's see. This is some footage that Ben took. So let me pause it there. But yeah, there's the monopod I was using and the lens. And this was early on. This was right around probably 5 o'clock. So the light was still fairly decent, but as you know, it drops off pretty quickly. Um, but I think this is where I took a picture of one of the ducks that you saw. Let's see if we can see it over here. Oh no, we didn't get around that far. Yeah, I'm so happy there. um, so there's some great footage that Ben captured for me. This is where, okay, you see right in here, let me expand this. You see all the Canadian geese in here? See how far away they are? I assume this is the iPhone at probably a 24 millimeter equivalent uh, focal field of view. And this is not too dissimilar that this is where I took this image, was from this scene here. of these Canadian geese. But with this lens, so I probably zoomed in somewhere right in here. Uh, it was really amazing. So like I said, I'm going to try and put a video together where I can organize this a little better for you. Let's see. Maybe no, yeah, this was the scene. See the glow, the orange glow? And this is where the Canadian geese were, and this is where I actually took the picture. It wasn't the one I just showed you, it's this one. So that's what I mean. I need to make a video so that I can be a little more organized in showing you this. But since we're live and we're all here, I'm happy to show you things, uh, give you a little advance preview of the video that I'm going to put together later. Um, so yeah, this was this was an amazing experience for me for just that 1 hour, and I think the rest of this footage is pretty much the same. Yeah, there's nothing. There's really not much else here. I'll have to look at all these buttons on the side. You have to kind of double check and make sure these are all set to where you want them to be, and to maximize your shooting experience, right, and performance, because there's different settings for different situations. So at the same time, uh, I asked Ben, now that because he was using my 300 millimeter f4 with 1.4 teleconverter, and I asked him what he thought about that, and he said it's fine, but I think I'm going to save up for this 150 to 400, and I totally get that. Uh, it seems like a boatload of money, and it really is a lot, right? It's out of the reach of most people, but if you can afford it, I highly recommend it. This lens, it's pretty amazing, and being able to zoom in and out is certainly very helpful for birds in flight, because you can kind of be zoomed out at 150 millimeters, spot the birds that you want to shoot, then zoom in quickly and continue shooting. That's one way to do it, particularly if you're using a teleconverter on top of that. And f8 is certainly, being at f8 like that, with the 1.4 and the internal teleconverter all combined being at f8, it's not that bad. It really isn't when you combine that with, denoising type software. I'm sure Lightroom would do just as well a job, but I know DxO is pretty solid when it comes to denoising and extracting details. But it even DxO, as good as it is, it's not going to be able to extract detail out of a lens that's not producing the detail. And this lens is producing every fine detail that it can. And, you know, so getting the images as clean and as nice as they looked, even at ISO 51,000 or ISO 32,000, I was very impressed because I have plenty of images at high ISO, uh, but without a solid, workflow, that entire pipeline from the lens to the camera sensor to the demosaicing to the denoising, all of that uh, can really produce amazing images at just about any ISO you want. And I don't normally shoot in that low light of a situation. Normally, I'm starting like at sunrise, and it gets brighter and brighter as as time passes. Versus this is a situation where it was as bright as it was going to get, and it only got darker as time went on. So it's kind of an opposite situation. I don't normally shoot in the evening hours or towards sunset. So, but even so, and like I said, not only the optical, uh, the excellent optical performance of the lens, On top of that, the image stabilization, being able to not hand hold in this case. Like I said, I was on a monopod, but I don't think it would have made much difference uh, if I was hand holding. Not too much. But I'm not going to go there because I didn't do it handheld. I did a couple of shots handheld, but I can't tell from looking at the images which ones were handheld, which ones were on the monopod, because sometimes I did put the monopod aside to hand hold the lens. If I had a little more time and a little bit more you know, planning, I could have done more, but it was a very spur of the moment thing. Ben contacted me over the weekend and I said, "Yeah, I can come over in a couple of days." And uh there I was, right? A couple of days, a few days later, shooting with this lens. And I hope that if I'm lucky, maybe OM Systems will reach out to me and let me borrow the lens for like a month. That would be great, and I would be out every day, cause I still gotta go to Conowingo Dam with all the eagles, and, of course, Huntley Meadows is pretty reliable, for birding, and, then there's Bombay Hook, that's also very reliable, and a lens like this would just be unbelievable at a place like Bombay Hook, cause I always go to Bombay Hook with my, 300 f4, and I was always happy with the results there, but man, if I can almost double my reach, let me think. Because I'm at like 840 millimeters max. I'm sorry. In micro four thirds, it would be I'm at 420 millimeters on micro four thirds and or real focal length, and I would be at 700 millimeters with this lens. So almost, not quite double, but quite a bit more, 50%, 60% more reach. And that's substantial, right? I and I just could not believe. I was thoroughly impressed, and honestly, it's not as heavy as it looks. This lens is really not as heavy as it looks. When I picked it up, I was surprised at how lightweight the lens was for its size. So let's get into the let me see. Oh, did I not bookmark? Oh, here. So let me make this a little bit larger. So here are four telephoto lenses from OM Systems, right? Their newest one, 150 to 600. Old Faithful here, 100 to 400, and then of course the 150 to 400, and then the lens that I actually have is the 300 f4. And let's just go down to a couple of the interesting specifications, right? This has excellent magnification of 0.7x. That's almost macro level, certainly close-up photography, as well as the 100 to 400. This is really, really good. On the OM system, the 150 to 400, not so much. But still, because of the focal length, the millimeters, it almost feels like a macro lens or close-up lens because of just the tremendous reach that this lens has. And then my 300 f4, again, because of the reach, it feels much more than you would expect. And then looking at the number of elements, this has the most, 28 elements and 18 groups, which makes sense. It's a very complicated lens. They had to put a lot of glass in there to make it perform the way that it does, clearly. And then finally, just the overall size and weight. It is substantially bigger. Uh, like it's 12.4 inches overall in length, and this is without the lens hood. Versus, say, I typically shoot here at 9 inches, so it's what is that 3.5 inches longer than my 300 f4. It doesn't sound like much, but it actually is quite a bit because look at the front element here, 95 millimeters versus 77. So it definitely feels substantially larger, but if you look at it, it's only 400 grams heavier than my lens. So uh, you don't really feel it. So because it's larger, adding 400 grams, it doesn't feel like it's heavier, if that makes any sense. The size to weight ratio is about the same as my 300 millimeter f4. Uh, versus, this is 2 kilos and it's only, what, 10 inches long. So it's actually 2 inches short. Now this has a barrel, so it zooms out. Zoomed out, it's much bigger. But just the look and feely type thing, this 150 to 600 lens feels and is much heavier, feels much heavier than its size would give you. You know what I mean? The size to weight ratio is much higher here. So um, it feels heavier than it is relative to the other lenses. This one being the lightest lens of all, you can see this lens is the same length as this lens, right? Or this is 8 inches and it's half the weight. So this lens actually feels to me the lightest, and it is the lightest, right? But it feels much lighter than it is, just like this lens feels much lighter than it actually is. And I think that's because of the size to weight ratio. Uh, Given its size, it's not heavy, right? So but I was using a monopod most of the time, so most of the weight was, in, being held for me. But yeah, it's totally worth it. If you can afford it, I highly recommend it, is all I can tell you. And relative to, and I'll just give you just a quick summary. I think Jimmy Chang talked about this in his video, possibly, but uh, I can tell you that this, okay, not this lens, but the other three. This one, the 300, the 150 to 400, and the 150 to 600. These have the best image stabilization. I would, obviously the 150 to 400 I feel like was the very best image stabilization I've ever seen. The 300 f4 is not far behind, but it was not as good as the 150 to 400. And the 150 to 600, I'd say, is equal to my 300 f4 in terms of image stabilization and the synchronization of that image stabilization. It's excellent. But the 150 to 400, the image stabilization just felt so much, just felt better. Okay, it's not like next level, but it was definitely better, I think, than my 300 f4. The image stabilization on the 100 to 400 is sort of a partial image stabilization, meaning at the wider zoom ranges, this is what I was told, is that it uses both in-body and lens stabilization together. But as you zoom out to 400 millimeters, at some point it switches to lens image stabilization only. And you can definitely see the difference in the image stabilization on the 100 to 400. It's not anywhere near what these other three lenses can do. So does that affect your photography? Not at all. Honestly, it makes no difference in your birds in flight type photography where you're pretty fast shutter speeds normally. Where it makes a difference if you like to do video, then you really do need to be on a gimbal or a monopod or some other additional stabilization other than the lens by itself. If you're going to be doing video, for photography, the image stabilization is way more than adequate. In fact, at fast enough shutter speeds, you can turn off image stabilization on any of these lenses if you're doing birds in flight at 1/2000th, 1/4000th of a second. I would even recommend you turn it off at those kinds of shutter speeds. That said, That's where I stand on these in terms of image stabilization, which is probably the least important factor of these three lenses. As impressive as it is, uh, it may be the least important thing for birds in flight. Bird on a stick, yeah, the image stabilization can be a big deal. So if you're shooting bird on a stick type photography, and a lot of the shots that I took were all of the shots I took with that lens were bird on a stick. Um, you can be on a monopod or gimbal, image stabilization is irrelevant. But if you're going to be hand holding of these four lenses, only the 100 to 400 is a little bit of a struggle to hand hold at slower shutter speeds. So if you want to get down to 1/500th of a second, you're going to have very, very steady hands. And you need to be at 1/500th of a second sometimes to get your ISO down low enough so you can get the most detail possible. Uh, so that's that. But yeah, image stabilization overall is really an excellent to have. It's nice to have it than not have it, but it's not critical for wildlife photography if you're doing photos. For video, it is very critical. In terms of image sharpness, just go in order of price here. The 150 to 400 is probably the sharpest. The 300 is probably equal in sharpness or just a hair less. Nothing that you could tell the difference between the two. I think in a blind test, you would not be able to tell the difference between those two lenses. And then the 150 to 600, again, at normal viewing distances on prints and looking at them on your screen, you're not gonna be able to tell a difference in sharpness between any of these lenses. All four of them are equally sharp for normal viewing distances and prints. Where you see the difference is if you have to start to crop the image down, right? So the bird is only taking up 20% of the frame and you have to crop 80% of the frame out. That's when you'll see haloing or softness in, say, the 100 to 400 or the 150 to 600 on the long end, at the 400 millimeter or 600 millimeter. That's where I see a tiny bit. And honestly, if the bird is only taking up 20% of the frame, I generally don't take the picture anyway, regardless of what lens I would have. Even with my 300 f4, a lot of times if the bird is 10-20% of the frame, there's just not enough pixels there anyway. Even if it's perfectly sharp, there's really not enough pixels there for you to print a large enough print or display it and look at the details. It's just not going to be enough because you're down to like maybe 1 or 2 megapixels. um, 4 to 6 megapixels is probably okay. If you crop in that much, you can get some pretty good detail between 4 and 6 megapixels, but ideally you want to be like 8 to 10, 8 to 12 megapixels on the subject. And then the other 10 or 12 megapixels can be background, blur, or whatever. It doesn't matter, but half your pixels should really go to the subject. And if you do that, any of these lenses will give you perfectly good results. So if you're on a budget, 100 to 400, right now this is $9.99, and I have my Amazon affiliate links down below, where of course I'll earn a commission if it's still at this price. I think it is because it's still at this price on B&H, so Amazon's going to be the same. You cannot go wrong really with any of these lenses, in my opinion. For birds in flight, bird on a stick. Just be conscious of those two things: the image stabilization and the filling the frame basically with the subject as much as you can, particularly on the more budget side, right? Um, now that said, if you go to my albums here, if you type in what was it, 150 to 600? Let me see if I should have an album. Yeah. Here's some images I took with the 150 to 600. I only borrowed it. Again, this was for about an hour doing hummingbirds. But look at this image here. I did this with the 150 to 600, and I was at 600 millimeters, ISO 12,800. I mean, this is what I'm saying. What was my shutter speed? 1/4000th of a second. And I'm wide open at f6.3. So this 150 to 600, if you can bear the size and weight of this lens, this is a tremendous value at 2,000 bucks on sale right now. Even at $2,800, it's hard to swallow because we all know that there's equivalent lenses for half that price on other mounts, system mounts. But I can tell you that for Micro Four Thirds, you will not be disappointed with this lens, especially at this price point of $19.99. So again, check out any of these images. This one is a 600 millimeters wide open ISO 8000. So this is at a lower ISO. And, look at the detail you can pull out of this. So let me go back to the album, and I will put a link to this in the chat as well. So if you want to look at these images, I only have 4. I don't have a lot. Let's see what this was. This was also 600 millimeters, ISO 6400. And again, think about it think about in the entire um gosh, I'm tired. I can't, my vocabulary is gone. But think about the entire workflow or pipeline between the lens, the camera, and the processing. When you have all of these in a perfect, if you have the perfect workflow for this combination, then you can get great results. And I don't think anyone can really argue with the results that I got with just these few images using that lens for just a very short time. And then I don't know if I created an album for the 100 to 400. Let me see if I have it. I do have one. I got one picture in there, and it's not even a good one. But this is heavily cropped. This is at the 400 millimeters wide open at ISO 2000. So this is probably, let me see what the size is. This is about a 3 or 4 megapixel image. So there's really only about 1 or 2 megapixels on the subject itself. So there's not a lot of pixels on this particular shot. Uh, I need to, yeah, I probably need to work on this album a little bit because I do have more pictures that are pretty decent. That's not a good example, unfortunately. But going back to this list, one other thing you need to consider is these two lenses, these pro lenses over here, the autofocusing motors are much faster. And I'm talking about going from point A to point B. These lenses just snap there in a split second. These two lenses run at about the same speed was my feeling, like probably less than half the speed of the pro lenses. So this can be an issue with very fast moving objects that are coming towards you or away from you. Will the autofocus motor be able to keep up is the question, right? For most of us, we're not in that situation, right? Where something is coming right at us. If something's moving away from us at a high rate of speed, don't even bother taking the picture, honestly. But if it's coming at you at a high rate of speed, you're more likely to get the shot with one of the pro lenses because the autofocusing motors are very, very fast. So even though you can capture on an OM1 50 frames per second continuous autofocus, the lens has to be able to keep up at 50 frames per second. And I think even OM system will force you to be at 25 frames per second with lenses that it doesn't know can do more or is told that it can't do faster than 25 frames per second through communications, right? That's all, magic and pixie dust to me. It's science, right? I don't know about that part of it so much, but I do know some of these lenses, you drop down to 25 frames per second, even if the camera's capable of doing more. But with these two lenses, you can definitely be at 150 frames per second with autofocus or 100 frames per second. You can do all of these, I think, at 100 frames per second because there's no autofocus involved. It just locks focus on the first frame and then locks it for the rest of the frames. Again, I think the difference here in real life for autofocus speed is minimal, I think, for most of us. We're not normally trying to focus on something coming right at us at a high rate of speed. However, that said, you will get more keepers because the pro lenses have faster autofocus motors, regardless of how the subject is moving. And the user experience of being able to bip, from point A to point B very quickly with a pro lens is much more enjoyable. And like I said, you're going to capture more images because of the faster autofocus. I think ultimately you're going to get great results with any of these lenses, but obviously the pro lenses, if they're going to charge you that much, they need to deliver something. And the strengths in the pro lenses are the optical quality on the from the short end to the long end in the one case, and just the image stabilization and the um, size and weight ratio of these lenses and the performance that they deliver, I think are second to none when it comes to any other lens I've ever tried. But that said, my experience is limited with other camera systems, so I don't want to say that these are the best lenses ever made. These are just the best lenses I've ever used on any camera system that I've owned at the equivalent focal lengths. So if we have, I'm more experienced with on other camera systems. I don't buy the telephoto zooms because I know I have a great system with the 300 f4 and the OM1, but I do buy the really nice primes, the 33 1.4 for the Fuji. Um, my Nikons, I have the 105 2.5, the 135, more vintage glass. But when I used to shoot, that's what I currently have, but I was shooting premium glass with my D750. I had the Sigma 50 1.4 art, the 24 to 1.5 art lenses, all of these. Every time they were fantastic lenses, but I've never, nothing has ever really, I would say, is better than what OM Systems is putting out, even for their 1.8 lenses. They're just amazing. The performance, the size to weight ratio, and even in the pricing, it's really hard to find an equivalent system that will deliver that kind of performance and quality uh, at this price point and size to weight ratio. I get it. The camera bodies are getting very similar across the board. I went to the camera show today, and I was playing around with the Canon R10, R7, R8, R6 Mark II, R5 Mark II. I looked at the new Fuji XM5. I wonder if I have a picture of that. Let me take a quick look. I'll show you that too. If it's in my, how come it's not? I know it's on my phone. I don't know why it's not been backed up yet. Let's see. This is a terrible. Whoops. I don't know if that's the XM5 at the bottom. That is my Pen F on the one side, and then the Fujifilm X100 on the other side. Look how tiny that XM5 is. It really is pretty tiny. I'll have to upload these later. I'll put them on my community page as soon as I can upload them. This is just another angle. But even at this angle, you can see the XM5 is pretty tiny because it's front and center. The Pen F kind of looks huge here because it's closest to it's the one closest to the phone. So that's not a fair shot. But this top-down shot, this top-down shot is probably the most representative of of the 3 shots that I took. 'Cause that has relatively minimal distortion. But yeah, it's pretty small. So I tried a lot of different camera systems. That XM5 is pretty nice, but no viewfinder, so and no IBIS. So it has its own deal breakers for me, but I don't think anyone that buys that camera will be disappointed. It seems really nice. Okay, so let me get to the chat section. I've been talking for almost an hour straight here. Um, Let me see what you guys are up to. I gotta find my chat window somewhere here. Ooh, wow, a lot of chat here. Uh, yeah. So Semjon is saying that the squirrel picture, yeah, it's pretty amazing, right? And Gordon says some great photos, wonderful birds, but love yeah, the turtles was one of my favorites, but my absolute favorite was the geese. I just love the color palette, that golden color palette of the geese. And Barry Engel, good to see you. Welcome to the stream. And System Mature actually owns this lens as well. So I nearly always have the 1.4 TC attached to my 150 to 400, even with the built-in 1.25. The photo quality is excellent. Yeah, I can see that now. I was very suspect when Ben handed me the lens with the 1.4 attached. I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna get the quality that I would I was worried, but now those fears are totally alleviated from the images that I got. They are just as good, if not better, than I got with my 300 and 1.4 combined. Really excellent. And Semjon says the stabilization is incredible. I had real problems with non-sync IS on the 100 to 400 at the 300 to 4. So it must be that's where the sync IS cuts off and it goes to lens image stabilization only on that lens. Never got sharp image at slower shutter speeds. One of the reasons I returned it after all. Yeah. So that makes sense. What you're saying makes sense. Doing bird on a stick type photography where you should be able to use slower shutter speeds, uh, then that's that's where this lens will fail a little bit. You're not gonna be able to use as low a shutter speed for bird on a stick type things, which I talked about earlier. And really impressive. Oh, thank you, Bear. I appreciate that. I was I was surprised I got anything from that day. I was really worried because when I first got there, I didn't see jack. I saw a couple of like ducks, and they were all muddy because there's the water was all it was all dried out. That whole park, and they need to dredge that so that the water can come back in. There's all this grass. Anyway, turned out some actually pretty decent photos, and I attribute that a lot to the lens, the camera, and the processing. That whole pipeline and workflow. I pretty much nailed it. And then and a little credit to me for being able to find the shots, and also to Ben. He pointed out, hey, look over there. There's some wood ducks. Ben helped me out, so it was a team effort, really. Um, And Dargos, it's sad that one of my local camera store does not carry stock of OM systems anymore and only special orders. I was told through the grapevine that the local wholesale source that my store works with uh, does not ship effectively, and there's always yeah, that sucks. Um, why is OM system so difficult when dealing with distribution of their product? I guess I understand their strong markets first. I don't know. I don't know about their whole logistics. I yeah, but it is slim, right? It is slim pickings when I go to my local camera store, and we have two of them local to me. Certainly, Best Buy doesn't have jack. It's all special order. So it's just a matter of they just don't sell enough cameras to set up a proper logistics, uh, to distribute their products here, is my guess. If they were selling a bunch of stuff at higher levels, then yeah, you better believe they're going to have the logistics worked out. They're going to have their trains, their trucks, all the different centers for distribution all worked out, you know. But when things get a little bit lean, right, they have to start cutting corners. They can't maintain their contracts with their current trucking or distribution centers, and they have to let the contracts expire, and they have to find other means to distribute things. And that's why when sales go down, it it makes sense to me why that happens. Something like what you're talking about. Things just from a very high level business logistics standpoint, volume is what drives the speed. The more volume you can do, the faster you can get things out, ironically, you know. Um, and Darko says the 100 to 400 would be a dream lens, even with the OM5. Hope all OM5 Mark II might have more goodies for yeah. I'm looking forward to the Mark II myself. That's when I might upgrade my EM5 Mark III. I'm just at a point, I have so many cameras, I can afford to skip a generation. When I started photography 10 years ago, every time a new generation came out, I just bought it. Just because that's just me. It's not the smart thing to do, but that's what I did. But now I'm at a point where I'm like, I should probably skip a generation or even go back a generation and save some money, you know, buy a used one. Um, Anyways, have a great day. We'll comment on the flip side. Oh, okay, great. We'll see you later, Darko. Thanks for dropping in. And then looks like here's hoping for a Z50 Mark II will update the Nikon lineup soon, but Nikon rooms are just okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with. I know the Z50 is a decent little APS-C camera. Uh, they would have to do a lot though. I just don't know how well that camera's selling. When I think Sony and Canon have the APS-C market pretty much locked in. Fuji is of course there. I don't know how the APS-C lines compare in terms of sales between these three companies, but Fuji's all in on APS-C, but they're more of a I don't want to say it's a boutique camera because they're not that boutique, but at the same time, uh, most photographers, I don't think will be too interested in an XM5. That's like a vlogger, TikToker type camera. Just like the Panasonic S9, when it came out, it was marketed and made for that type of market, videographers. The X100V or VI, whatever, the X100, the latest one is just not available, not at a price that any reasonable photographer would pay, right? Uh, somebody that wants the camera badly might pay it, but if you're really reasonable about your purchases, then you're not going to buy that, or you're not going to pay the kind of money that they're asking for that. But I think the XT50 is very attractive, very very attractive. I could have got it for 150 bucks off today, um, but I'm going to wait. I might wait because right now my XH2, I use it mostly in the studio for recording some videos and B-roll. I use it mostly for video, but I have these wonderful lenses for it. And the 56 1.4 from Sigma, the 33 1.4, the Fuji one, the 23 1.4, and I also have the kit lens, but it's really good. It's the 55 to 200, I think it is, their zoom lens, or is it 55 to 300? There's some great lenses for that camera. It's really a great photo camera. And the detail it produces, I've done a few studio shots, selfies, and the detail at 40 megapixels is there. It looks a little soft on initial inspection, but when I really look for the details, it's there. There's 40 megapixels worth of detail there. Uh, you just have to add a little bit of contrast. It's just a little bit low contrast. That's why it looks a little soft to me. But that's easily fixed, right? A little processing. Okay, let me get further in the chat here. Bon, good to see you. And Seraphin. Okay, this is very, very early on. Intrigue. Jeff Painter. Oh, hey, Jeff. And yes, Gordon, I had a lot of fun. Same photos with the TG7. I have a TG5, but TG5, I got some great photos. Wonder if I have an album. Like I said, on my Flickr page, I am trying to create albums. Is it TG-5? Yeah. I have an album for my TG5, if you want to look at these. This is a good comparison. TG5 versus the LX100. And let's see. Yeah, a lot of nice pictures in here from the TG5. So if you want to see my, you don't, I'm not saying look at my photos because they're great photos. They're not great photos. They're just okay, right? But if you want to see, but I do put a lot of effort into making sure that I captured a sharp image and that whole pipeline from aperture settings, my settings, my exposure, uh, whatever focal length, whatever I do with that camera, that entire workflow of capturing an image, I'd always do my very best. Now, the photo itself, the composition might suck or the subject might suck. It might be a sucky photo, but technically, on a technical level, I always try to do my very best so that that entire workflow produces the best quality image possible. And that's where my focus has always been because when I try to teach people how to do photography, I don't teach them composition. I give them a few tips, right? Don't try to take a picture of an eagle with a wide angle lens. I mean, I can give out some very basic advice like that, right? But my advice and what I try to teach people is how you can get a sharp image, how you can get a good exposure, what focal lengths should you use for certain types of subjects, things like more technical, more pragmatic type advice. The very subjective things like composition, subjects, telling a story. Don't ask me, man. I am just the worst person to ask about those kinds of things. I try my own photography, but if you go through my Flickr and Instagram, you can see I suck. It's okay. My photos are mediocre on that level. On a very artistic level, they're mediocre. But I think on a technical level, something I've been doing new too, if you go to my Instagram, uh, I found a way, it's here. If you go to my Instagram, I found a way to just cut and paste the EXIF data straight in. So you get everything here. So this is awesome. What you don't see, all you see here is that I was processed with DxO Photolab 8. But you don't see everything I did in the processing, right? All the different settings when I do editing. But this is probably, uh, people say settings don't matter. They do matter. Settings matter. I was so, this is where I remember watching a video from Tony and Chelsea. I love those guys, especially Chelsea. I love Chelsea. But one of the videos he said, don't ask me what my settings were. It's a waste of time. Settings don't matter. And this is where I disagree. I think that somebody that wants to, because I get it. I get why he said that. I totally understand where he's coming from and why he said that. And I don't disagree with the fundamental reasons for his statement, right? That when you take a picture of something and somebody asks you what were your settings, it's such a hard thing to answer because a lot of times your settings are dictated on the fly, and they're going to be very, very different for the very next picture. So unless you're standing side by side with me at the same time and taking the same exact picture, it almost doesn't matter what my settings were. So I think that's where he's coming from, right? Because when I go the next day to the same location, the lighting's going to be different. The subject might be a little bit different as well. The scene, everything can be different the next day. My settings might be totally different the next day than they were yesterday, even though I'm taking basically the same picture. That's a more minute difference day to day, but I get where he's coming from, right? But that said, when you look at the settings like I have posted here directly with the exit data, it tells you a lot of things. I'm at 1/125th of a second. I'm at f8. I'm at ISO 1250. I'm at 700 millimeters. So what does that tell you? It tells you either this lens has amazing image stabilization, or I was on a tripod. There's a lot of things you can extrapolate this. You can see also it shows you my exposure compensation. I was at -1E, that I didn't use a flash. There's a lot of things that you can extrapolate from these settings about how I took this photo, right? Now, some of it you're going to have to guess. I get it. But there's a lot to learn from the settings here. Also, the time of day and time of year gives you an idea of, the lighting as well. Since we're in outdoors, we're in ambient lighting. Uh, so if I were looking at this without knowing that because I took this picture, but if this was somebody else's exif data, I would be really impressed at that shutter speed. I'd be like, how the heck did you do this at 1/25th of a second at 700 millimeters? Because you're not using flash. If you did this with flash, maybe, right? But then when you start to think about it, you're like, okay, you're taking pictures of turtles. They're not moving very fast. Even when they move, they don't move very fast. So you can probably get away with 1/25th of a second with a turtle, number one. So that's why there's no motion blur from the subject itself, because the subject is a turtle. Number two, um, I would also make a huge assumption, and it wouldn't be a leap of faith to say, yeah, I was using a monopod or a tripod. Whoever took this picture was using a monopod or a tripod. Uh, the other thing is interesting is, why did I dial in -1 exposure comp? Okay, well, maybe because I wanted to protect the highlights here in the water, on the top of the turtle shell, because there are some speculars here, right? So, you see what I'm getting at. When you look at the setting, especially now that I can post them with this kind of detail, because Flickr does this automatically. I don't have to do this. But a lot of people look at it on Instagram. Now I can do this on Instagram, which is awesome. I can just cut and paste. Because before I used to I'd have to pull up the exit data, type all that crap in. And sometimes I would make a mistake, but now I don't have to worry about that unless I cut and paste the wrong exit data altogether. Um, I hope you guys find that useful. For those of you that like to look at the settings and try to extrapolate, why did I use the settings that I did for the subject and the lighting that I took, right? And the exposure that I used. Because you can go to this shot and you can see I'm at 1/500th of a second. So why did I choose 1/500th of a second instead of 1/125th? Well, a duck moves a little bit faster than a turtle, right? So I was like, I want a little bit faster shutter speed. So I was very, very deliberate about my shutter speed. Like this duck was actually swimming and moving in the water. So what was my shutter speed? 1/1000th of a second. So there's reasons I chose, you're not seeing. I'm looking at this one, right? 1/1000th of a second. This duck was swimming and moving. So I knew I'm not going to use 1/125th of a second. I'm going to use 1/1000th. I could have probably got away with 1/500th, but I wanted to make sure that I had a tack sharp image because I was at 700 millimeters. And this was the image I was talking about with the squirrel, 1/250th of a second. The squirrel was just sitting there like that. But they're not as slow as a squirrel. They twitch and they do things. So I was kind of gambling on this shutter. Normally I would have picked 1/500th or 1/1000th. I think 1/500th would have probably been a more appropriate shutter speed here. But fortunately, I got lucky. 1/250th worked. So this was kind of a little bit of luck on this shot. But anyhow, so I will tell you that settings do matter when you want to use it for educational purposes, right? So that when people look at your photo, they can look at it and say, you didn't need 1/4000th of a second, or you did need 1/4000th of a second, or why did you use 1/4000th? Why did you use 1/125th? You start you start thinking and asking questions to yourself. And if we're in a live stream, you can always just ask me, why did I use 1/125th of a second? You know, um, because if you guys are not asking me questions, right? Uh, I'm not doing my job. My job is for you guys to ask me questions, basically, as an educator, right? When I'm in that education mode, right? Right now I'm in the jibber jabber mode. I'm just rambling a bit. But always feel free to ask me any questions about any of my photos or anything about the cameras. I'll always do the best that I can. I'm not as good as David over there on OM Systems live streams. I forget his name exactly. There's a guy over there on OM Systems. One of the technical guys is pretty freaking amazing. Uh, that guy can just answer a question and answer it accurately and with all the caveats and precision that I could never do. But at least I can point you in the right direction usually, or maybe I don't know. Anyway, let me go back to the chat and let's see. Uh, Vaughn has a question here. Hey Rob, photos look excellent. Have you shot much with any of the new primes from Canon or Nikon? I have not. I did test a few of the primes today. I tried, they're not new, but the 85 macro f2. They also had the 85 1.2. I didn't even put my SD card in the camera. They had their own. So I just I just looked at a few and pixel peeped them on the screen. They're fine, but yeah, I can't say that I've shot much with them. I've tried a couple and they're fine. They look nice. I mean, they're big and heavy though. Uh the 1.2 lenses from Canon, my God, it's like a big gulp. I mean, they were pretty massive. But I really do like, there is nothing, I think if you have like a Canon R10, uh, Canon R50, and you put like their 16 or 28 millimeter f2.8 prime or the 50 millimeter 1.8, you can have a really, really nice little system there with Canon for like $1,000, right? Because the camera's what, 600 or 700. Then you get the three primes, they're about 200 a piece. So yeah, you'd be closer to $1,200, $1,300, but that's a nice little setup. Great autofocus, articulating, there's a lot of limitations too, right? They don't really compare in a lot of ways to what you can do with, say, uh, even in an old EM10 Mark IV, right? Hopefully they replace that. I don't think they will, but uh, I would still rather shoot with an EM10 Mark IV than even a Canon R50 at this point, because of the kind of photography and features that it has that I would use, right? I would definitely use live comp. Um, and I know the menus and the capabilities and the overall size and weight of all the lenses and stuff you can use with it are going to be smaller. But that's more of a preference than it is a pragmatic reason to choose Micro Four Thirds. From a pragmatic and price standpoint, right now, I think like a Canon R10 or a Canon R50 makes more sense than an EM10 Mark IV uh, at at this point in time. If you're going to stay with the smaller primes, things change when you start talking about their telephotos and other things, right? It gets expensive very quickly. But like a Sony A6100, even though that's pretty old, it's really a good little camera for $500. Okay, but it's ugly, no IBIS. It's not a great camera ergonomically or feature-wise, but it'll take just as good a picture as any camera out there, really. And has good autofocus. In terms of weight, ease of use, and for travel, there's nothing really to compete with the 150 to 400 all-in-one camera. Expensive, but worth the money. I would agree, 100%. It's really impressive. It's a really impressive system. And Vaughn says, fair enough. I am having a big dilemma in picking up a lens to invest in, either Olympus you have, or go with Nikon 800 PF to pair with the Z8. Okay. Just be careful with, and you're probably aware of this, but with the PF lenses from Nikon, the autofocus areas can be very, very busy, almost unpleasant for some people. They hate it. But it has to be in certain types of shots, right? Like shots that have a lot of brush and branches and grass in the background. That's when the bokeh in the background, the autofocus areas can get very, very busy, and a lot of speculars like rippling water. A PF lens can be pretty jarring in terms of the autofocus areas. And that's because of the way they designed the lenses to be smaller and lighter, is they use basically a Fresnel, I keep saying Fresnel, a Fresnel design in their lenses that are, basically layered cut pieces of glass. And that's why you get that effect. For lots of the photography that you would do with that kind of lens, you're shooting, your background is clouds and skies, or even the bird is in a tree, but they're standing right there, right? The background behind them is pretty clear. And all of the branches and everything in the bird will be in focus, not out of focus. Where the background gets kind of busy with these PF lenses is when you have the bird, say, flying low to the water at a distance, and the background behind the bird is pretty far away, and it's busy, like branches and rippling water. These kind of things, a PF lens can be a little bit jarring, in my opinion. It's subjective, right? I'm being very subjective here. But for most things, you'll be okay. But sometimes you're going to run into images that I think are, so just be aware of that. I'm not saying don't buy the lens because of that, because like I said, probably 90% of your images will be, you won't even notice any issues or differences between that and a regular lens. But you will run into situations where the PF lens will show its flaws, right? Or not, I wouldn't, flaw is not the right thing, it's character. I think that's the best way to put it. You'll see the character of a PF lens in certain shots that some people find unpleasant. Okay. But I'm just speaking out of my butt. Don't don't take everything I say. Look at images for yourself and see what you think. It's not a deal breaker in any way, a PF lens versus a regular lens, in my opinion. It's just something you have to be aware of, right? Given they are both Sigma based, not surprising, having the 100 to 400 and 300, I took the zoom on Safari, and in good light, I was very happy with the performance. Once light drops little, then you can tell. Yes, absolutely. When you have to start to crank the ISO, then the sharpness of the lens becomes even more critical, because whatever demosaicing software that you use for your raw image processor is going to have to try to extract detail from the raw image through the noise. And if the detail's not there, the sharpness of the lens is not producing it to begin with, then yeah, as the light starts to drop, as your ISOs start to go up, uh, that's when you start to see the lens, the strength and weaknesses of the lens, right? Like this lens is a little bit stronger than this one. So in your case, the 300 definitely, I guarantee at the same ISO, on the same subject lighting, all of that, side by side, the 300 is going to produce sharper images at a higher ISO than the 100 to 400 at the same focal length and all of that. And Matthew said, I didn't notice such a huge difference. The 300 is better, and took that to Costa Rica forest where I can control distance and need light. Yeah, it's not much different in good light. Really, if you can fill the frame with the subject, half the frame, certainly if you got half the subject in half of the frame, it's going to be very hard to tell the difference between the two lenses without pixel peeping down to like microscopic levels. It's just like I said, when you get to the more extreme ends of this shooting, the exposure and ISO and all of that, that's when you can start to see the lens separate even more, right? And you ultimately end up with more keepers because of the autofocusing speed and the IBIS, the strength of the IBIS. The pro lens will pull ahead as you get into this more extreme situations. But if we're both sitting there in good light, I mean, I could sit there with my 75 to 300 kit lens and take a really nice sharp picture with that, you know? I mean, and that's a $350 lens right now on sale, right? I can get amazing images out of that. But when you start pushing the lens, that's when, you know, that ain't gonna keep up even at 25 frames per second, right? The autofocusing motors, it's not gonna keep up. Uh, it's gonna have problems with, you know, on the long end at 300 millimeters, when you start to crop in, like the subject is less than 20% or 10% of the frame, you start cropping in, you'll start to really, basically you're zooming in on all the defects, right, that the lens produces. But if you're filling the frame, more or less with the subject in good light, I can tell you in a blind test, I would have a hard time telling the difference between it and a 300 f4 Pro. Um, Rob, not sure if you talked about this being I just joined, but in your opinion, how do you feel about the monochrome after? Oh, okay, yeah, I haven't talked about this. So I'm still shooting with it a little bit every day. This is the Pentax monochrome. I got such a good deal on it. Plus, you combine a good deal and gas in the same day. Yeah, I am helpless. I have no resistance. Um, but yeah, I paid 15.74 plus tax, so it was like 16 and free shipping and something, and less than 2,000 clicks on it. They didn't tell me that when I bought it, but when I got it in, I checked. It was less than 2,000 clicks, so it's mint condition. With the battery and charger, plug-in charger. It's not a real charger. So I bought a real charger, by the way. The ones that I always recommend. I've talked about this in the past. About chargers. I should make a whole video on chargers, but then, I'm opening up a can of worms because there are a lot of issues with these generic chargers. For probably 1% of the people out there, they'd have a problem. And that's when the keyboard jockeys come out and tear you down, right? Is that 1%. When really you're just trying to tell people, hey, for 10 bucks, I mean, come on, do you really have to say something nasty? I'm talking about a $10 charger. And you're gonna give me a hard time about this? I mean, if it doesn't work, just return it, for God's sake, or throw it in the trash. It's $10. I don't want to get on a rant, but sometimes you get the nastiest comments for nothing, for $10 items. And I'm like, fair enough, you know. But I'd rather talk about something that's going to help 99% of the people out there buying a $10 charger. This is like a $10 charger. And getting and anyway, all right, so the monochrome, let me show you a couple images I took today, and then I'll talk about, but I haven't taken enough images to really give you my final gut, my final feeling about it, so to speak. I'm still in that that honeymoon phase. That's what it's called, right? I'm still like loving this camera to death and loving the photos that I'm getting out of it. But I did I tried to take some images today, side by side. These are the ones I took today. Or how do I get? Uh, these are panos that I did. This is like maybe 3 images stitched together. Um, I haven't uploaded. I'm gonna upload these to my Flickr page where you can look at them. Um, maybe I can just do that now. Let's see. Where's my Flickr page? I can do that now. So pictures, Instagram. I'll upload these to this one, and that's a raw. I was testing out some of the, I was doing some selfies of monochrome and comparing them. I'll, let me just, oops. So Pentax, there was the 35 and the monochrome. These are black and white. Okay, so I'm going to put them in the right albums. So you can look at these later. Oh, this one needs to be in Pano. So let me add, this is Pano. So if you guys want to look at these together with me, you can, but let me go back to, I think I cherry picked a few of these. Okay. So here's just a couple of samples that I took today. I'll eventually post all of these onto Flickr and Instagram, and you'll see all the EXIF data. But I am processing these a bit. So basically what I'm trying to say is the straight out of camera raw images are amazing from the Pentax monochrome. The tonality that I'm seeing, I'm very impressed with. And the overall performance of the camera, now that I have my decent prime lens, I have the 35 2.8. The images are sharp corner to corner. So like I said, I'm still kind of in that honeymoon phase though, because I love shooting black and white, and it's just something about being forced to shoot in black and white and getting the results that I'm seeing are pretty amazing. When I was testing the tonality between my Pen F, let me see, I can pull that up. I can talk about this a little bit. I'm not proud of these pictures. They're terrible selfies. Okay, so these four images here are straight out of camera, raw images, no processing applied. Okay, and then of course I exported them as JPEG so I could compare them, but I didn't do any processing. Can you guess which one is, let me get my big head. Can you guess which one? You probably can't in a stream. A stream just compresses everything so much, it's hard to see. I'm going to redo these when I'm not looking like I'm high, or tired. Because I didn't even comb my hair or anything for these shots. But can you tell off the bat which one is from which camera? Probably not. I have 4 different cameras here. I took one with the Pentax monochrome, another one with my Olympus OM1, another one with the Fujifilm X-H2, and another one with the Olympus EM5 Mark II, so the old 16 megapixel. And I have the histograms up because I was looking at the histogram to see the spread of the tones, because I was kind of curious about that as well. And the settings were identical for all intents and purposes between these 4 cameras. So let me hit this. Wait, how come it's not showing? Oh, here, EXIF. So here's what's what. OM1 is here. EM5 Mark II is here. This is the XH2, and this is the K3 monochrome. To my eye, the OM1 straight out of camera is very similar to the K3 monochrome straight out of camera. The tone curve on the M5 Mark II here is a little bit stronger. Uh, but I would put that at number 2. So number 1, number 2, and then the Fujifilm X-H2, I would put it number 3 with respect to matching the straight out of camera tonality of the Pentax monochrome. Uh, it's a little bit lighter overall. But what's weird is I also I also I I took RAW plus JPEG. When you look at the JPEGs straight out of camera, everything is kind of reversed. The Fujifilm straight out of camera monochrome, not like their film sim monochromes, but the straight out of camera monochrome JPEG was the closest to matching the tonality of the K3 monochrome RAW file. So that I found very interesting. In the Olympus cameras, they push the tone curve. They push the S curve a little bit higher, so there's a little higher contrast, and it's brightened slightly, and it's sharpened a little bit too. Um, so more so than the Fuji is. So they had a little more contrast, and they were a little brighter in the highlights and a little darker in the shadows, and they were a little bit crispier. So the Olympus camera straight out of camera JPEGs were least like the monochrome, but the straight out of camera RAWs were more like the monochrome Pentax, if that makes sense. So I don't think I'm going to make a video on this specifically, so I'm just going to tell you about it here live, but still, my gut feeling is that the tonality I'm getting from the K3 monochrome is very, very similar to what I was getting with black and white film. Just pin sharp with no grain, you know? Uh, Particularly with the portraits and you're dealing with skin tones, I noticed right away that suddenly, because when I was studying Yusuf Karsh, right? He did the Kennedy picture, he did the other general, I forget his name. If you look at Yusuf Karsh and the kind of photos and portraits that he did, I was just amazed with the tonality and the lighting that he did. I mean, there's a lot more than just because he used black and white film. But I tried to duplicate his lighting setup. I looked all over and I figured out what his lighting setup was. And I got really, really close with my OM1 or whatever I think I was shooting with my EM5 Mark II. I got really close, but I could not match the tones, the gradation of tones like Yusuf Karsh was getting. And I attributed that mostly to maybe I'm not doing the lighting correctly, something. But as soon as I shot with the images that I'm showing here are not too dissimilar from what Yusuf Karsh does in terms of lighting, using Fresnel lenses and a mixture of multiple lights, right, et cetera, et cetera. This is the closest that I've come to duplicating the tonality that I saw in the Yusuf Karsh images was with the Pentax K3 monochrome. So now I'm starting to understand what the benefits are of the monochrome camera. People, online, when you look at the reviews online, people are always like, yeah, you get more sharpness, you get better dynamic range, you have to watch your highlights. What else do they talk about? And they're always saying, just buy a full frame camera and shoot black and white and convert it, and you'll get the same results. And I'm like, it's not the same. It's not the same. I'm gonna shoot with my Sony and my Nikon full frame cameras and compare those. So I haven't done that yet because my Nikon, I don't have a remote trigger, and my Sony I do, so I can do that one pretty easily. Those are full frame cameras. I think I think the Nikon is gonna do probably the better than the Sony is my gut feeling. I've always loved the black and whites that I got from my Nikon DF, but we'll see. But yeah, I have no complaints. I'm finally getting around to the ergonomics and the settings and the exposure. I was getting the exposure wrong all the time. I'm still experimenting with the metering on this camera. I'm not getting the exposure that I want. I'm really good with the Olympus cameras. Getting the exposure that I want, no problem, right? Because I'm like a surgeon with the dials and settings. With the Pentax, man, I'm like, oh, this is too bright, this is too dark. Why did it expose this way? Why is it doing that? And why did it miss focus? And why am I at +1? I'm accidentally bumping dials and changing the aperture or exposure compensation. I'm still making very clumsy mistakes, and I'm not getting consistent exposures and images that I want. But I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I've got the button layout and customizations that I think are going to work for me, so that I'm not making as many mistakes that I have been all week. So it's going to take me a little more time to get used to using the camera and understanding when it can focus. And this is what I mean about when I was talking about early on about the lens, the camera, and the processing. This pipeline has to be perfected. This entire workflow has to be perfected to get the best results possible, regardless of camera, lens, software that you're using. You can get great results, but you have to tweak every little piece along the way and develop a workflows so that you can adjust to the situation in front of you quickly and capture the moment the way that you want to capture it. Because a lot of the mistakes I made early on in my photography is, the montage, fix it in post, take the picture, fix it in post. And that is certainly a lot of people do that, and that's fine. But what I'm finding is if I can get it correct in post or in the field when I'm standing there right in front of the subject and I can get what I want, going into post processing and perfecting it is a breeze. But it's really important you get it right and correct and accurate in the field first, and that you got your workflow in the field, all your settings, how the camera exposes, how the camera focuses, what are the limits of the camera, where are its strengths, and working out all of that between the camera lens and the software that you're going to be using with it. You have to, and I've got a very, very good feel for my OM1 and 300 f4 bird and flight settings and processing those images. As you can see, from even the 150 to 400, I was able to quickly adapt to that because it's all OM systems, right? I was very able quickly to adapt to that system and extract, I think, really good images given the time frame that I had and the location that I was at, the kind of subjects that I had access to. I was pretty impressed with what came out of that. Um, and I attribute a lot of that to the system, but also, a little credit to me in the sense that I have, I've worked years and years with OM System Olympus cameras, so that my workflow, that pipeline, that workflow is almost perfected, from my point of view. I mean, once you get past that, you get into the more subjective areas, like I talked about. My pictures aren't that great; they're okay, right? But I have a workflow that I feel like I've perfected, and I'm not anywhere near that with my Pentax monochrome. I'm still dealing with the screw drive autofocus. I'm dealing with the button layout. Like I said, I was constantly bumping. I'm like looking at it, I'm like, why am I at f7.1? I should be at f8 or I should be at f5.6. When did I change it? Why is my exposure comp, off, right? It's like every time I picked up the camera to take a picture, I felt like I accidentally bumped a dial or changed something that I didn't want to, shot to shot to shot. So I'm still kind of in a clumsy phase with this camera. It's no fault of the camera, it's all me, but it won't take me long. I'm taking this camera out all the time. I'm loving it. It's heavy though. Oh my God, man. I bet this with the lens and the little plate I have on here, I bet this is a kilo. Uh, it's heavy. I'm like half that weight with my Pen F. I took out my Pen F today. It's here upside down because I took the battery out to charge it. I left it open so I remember because I walked out last 2 days ago. I walked out with this camera with no battery, and I'm like, oh crap. So I'm not going to close this until I put the battery back in. That camera, man, yeah, no problem. I go out there and I get the very best picture possible that that camera can take, in my opinion, technically speaking. And I might have a couple I can show you from there. If anybody, if anybody cares about my pictures, I don't know. Let's see. Well, I got one. So this is a raw image I processed just of a tree in monochrome. So I converted it. Let's see. What if we unconvert it? Oh, I didn't want to do auto here. So it's pretty rich here. That's because, yeah, Lightroom just jacked up the vibrance. But yeah, if you pixel peep this, let's go to 200%. I mean, this is the, and what was I at? I was at f5.6 with the 25 millimeter 1.4, 1/1000th of a second. I mean, I am extracting every pixel out of that 20 megapixels on this camera. This image here is the straight out of camera JPEG with in monochrome with the red filter applied. So all this image needs is a 4:5 crop, and I'm done, right? Maybe let's see what the auto does. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I would of course process this even a little more, and then this image here, just convert to black and white. And if we compare these side by side, so this is the straight out of camera. I'm sorry, this is the raw image converted to black and white with some minor processing. This is the straight out of camera JPEG with the digital red filter applied. So with the digital red filter applied, you can see the skies are darker and the tree is brighter because there's a lot of red in the trees and there's some yellows in the grass, which has a little bit of red to it. So it looks brighter. So I think I like the straight out of camera better than the raw image. The only problem is if you pixel peep the JPEG, you can see some haloing. And this is where um, we go back to using the Pentax monochrome and putting a real red filter on it. You do not get haloing like this with the monochrome camera, right? When you use an actual physical red filter. When you do digital red filter, at least in camera on the Pen F, I notice I get this haloing um, on the image. And that's really, yeah, that doesn't look good, right? If you're going to print this or show it on any kind of large display, you can see it, especially when I zoom in 200%, you can see it very easily. Um, but I didn't take too many pictures with the Pen F. Let me take the flag off. So I have 66 images that I took. So I did a pano. I need to work on that. This is a nice color image of the same building. You know, if I punch in, like I said, I'm getting every single pixel out of it. So this is technically, in my opinion, technically a perfect image with respect to the settings and the exposure settings, you know, the focusing point, the aperture, all of that stuff, I think came together perfectly. And this is a standard 3/4 shot of a building. This is what I typically do for my clients when I do architectural photography. You always do a 3/4 shot of the building. So all this really needs is, you know, profile correction and, uh, you know, maybe a little perspective distortion. That's probably a bit too much. We'll just do a level. So that looks pretty natural. The only thing I might do is just fill in the shadows a tiny bit. and pull back the vibrancy. That's another thing I do. Sometimes I usually mute, like just pull the vibrancy back on the image a little bit, and the texture, just soften the image a tiny bit. And this is how, I do this mostly in Photolab, but this is how I typically deliver an image. Just make it a little bit softer. Anywho, let me go back to the chat. I've been talking too much. I want to see if I can answer some questions or. Let's see, given both, okay, that I read. My only reservation about the 100 to 600 is the overall size, particularly when extended, and the balance of the external zoom. Yeah, it's a big heavy lens. What? It's 4 pounds, right? And you're gonna put that on a camera that weighs maybe 1 or 2. Uh, when I was using it, I was hand holding. I think if you're on a monopod or a gimbal, a monopod and a gimbal combo would be best for that. I wouldn't want to hand hold that thing for a 2, 3 hour photo shoot, birds in flight type stuff. I would get pretty tired. But I'm a stick man. I don't really have muscles and all that, you know? Uh, and yeah, I don't think you're any spring chicken either, right? System matures. So yeah, the 100 to 600 definitely is monopod material at a minimum for any length of time. For a short time, I got by for an hour with it. And then, oh yeah, we talked about this, and Marsha's here. Hey, Marsha from Florida, always good to see you. Uh, yeah, Ben has all the toys. Yep. 1/15 of a sec, razor sharp. Wow, that's amazing. Was that one of my shots or no? You got to be talking about one of yours. I don't think I've ever done 1/15. Not on purpose anyway. I try to minimum 1/60th. I like to set 1/125th if I can as a minimum. Yeah, David Smith. That guy is a freaking genius or he's a master. Genius is not the right word. He's a master. Yeah, Dax. Yeah, I've heard that nickname. Hey Marco, how you doing? Good to see you. And in reference to XMeta says, how would you rate the AF on the K3 responsive and accuracy? It's it's hard for me to say at this point because I'm still accidentally moving the focus point where I don't want it to. Uh, like I was focusing on a friend of mine and I missed her face. And yeah, I don't quite have the autofocusing settings down quite yet. My initial, I mean, most of the time, if I'm in single point, it locks on like this, but there's been times like I'm using autofocus continuous autofocus, right? And I'll snap the picture and it'll be out of focus. And this is in low light situations. So I would say in good light, you know, it's no big deal. It does a great job. It's just when I got into low light situations where I noticed it struggles. It hunts back and forth, and if it does take the picture, it misses. Unlike my OM1, which, and Robin Wong will disagree with me immediately, but I found the OM1 can autofocus in low light extremely well. Maybe not on somebody's face like Robin has to do all the time. I can't speak to what Robin's shooting conditions are like. But for the most part, my OM1 uh, is it can just snap in better than my Sony A7R5. The A7R5 struggles in low light. The K3 seems to struggle even more than the Sony. So, but in good light, and it's really every camera should focus well in good light. In good light, I am able to nail focus, but I still miss sometimes. But I think it's still me. I don't think I can blame the camera at this point. So ask me maybe, ask me maybe next month, like after I've been using it for a while, then I'll have a good feel. Then I've worked out. I would admit it, I would develop some muscle memory for the autofocus and bringing it up to my eye and immediately recognizing where the camera is focusing and why it's focusing there, because it has some additional settings like there's some fine tuning you can do in the AFC menu. There's only a couple of things. It's not a very complicated autofocus system, but you have to get a feel for how the camera reacts when you push the focus button, if you know what I mean. At least for me, I had to develop a relationship with the camera and a certain muscle memory with the camera where there's this hand-eye coordination where when I push the shutter button, I expect it to focus and get a sharp image. And if it doesn't, that's a problem. So to give you a good example is like when we talk about the Pen F, the OM1, the M5 Mark III, the M5 Mark II, I can tell you very quickly which one is the best and why, right? Pen F is at the bottom in terms of autofocus. In good light, yeah, I can lock in. I got a good feel for getting the Pen F to focus in most conditions. But there's going to be times when it's going to miss, where the M5 Mark II is not going to miss. The M5 Mark II is going to get more keepers than a Pen F every day, all day long. The M5 Mark III is going to do better than the M5 Mark II every day, all day long, right? Especially with moving subjects and subjects that are kind of far away. Obviously, the OM1 is going to be the best by a significant margin over the other cameras. With respect to face detect, the face detect, because the other cameras don't have subject detect, so we can't compare that. But the face detect on the OM1 is by far superior to the EM5 Mark III. I would say probably equal to the EM1 Mark III, maybe a little better, but let's just say equal for all intents and purposes. The M1 Mark III, the OM1 face detect is excellent in good light. It's when the light starts to drop that you start to get more false positives and the OM1 is going to struggle and eventually just totally fail, where the EM1 Mark III, EM1 Mark II are going to continue to autofocus. Even though you get more false positives, you'll get more in focus than the OM1 ever will, right? Because the light level just drops. But once you get to a certain light level, the OM1 takes over and will be better in every way, at least in my testing. There are many others that might disagree with me, and that's okay. Make your own video, do your own testing. Like Robin did. He did his own videos and testing, and he showed you his problems, and I showed you my problems, right? But overall, um, I would have to say I can't give it a fair evaluation. Just like I can't give it a fair evaluation to the monochrome images I'm getting out of it. Other than to say so far, it really feels like it's giving me the tonality that I'm seeing in film from my film images. I did a comparison on my Flickr page right here. I know you didn't ask about this. Uh, right here, K3 monochrome. This was an image I took a year or two ago. These images are virtually identical in tonality. It's just amazing how close they are. I mean, it's just shocking. And Ellie's amazing how she can give me the same exact pose even after a couple of years. Uh, but the autofocus, yeah, autofocus is okay when I know I did it right, but I don't know I'm always doing it right and I'm missing focus. But I did notice in low light, it does struggle and gives me false positives more often as the light starts to drop. That's all I can say for now. Oh, thanks. Love the old photos of old buildings. Yeah, like I said, I drove around today and took those. And then Matthew says, I got a similar one off eBay for my own 5, but was careful which seller. First one didn't work, so sent me another which did. Be careful who you buy from as QC can be. Yes. I've gotten chargers like this where this slot has gone bad and then this slot still works. So I just use it for the one slot. I've had one of them do that to me. I had another one where the jack here, the port is a little bit flaky. I have to jiggle the cord in the right position to get it to charge the batteries. So I'm gonna eventually throw that away. But like I said, these are like $10, right? Um, they're not that expensive. Um, and if it works out of the box, it'll probably work forever. I got chargers that I paid $10 for that I've been using for, gosh, almost 8 years now. Still using them to this day. And they were cheap. And I use the OEM batteries, you know, I haven't had any battery problems. Uh, I like the look of the bottom of, so that was the Fuji X-H2, if I recall correctly. Yeah, it was a little bit lighter tones. But like I said, the straight out of camera JPEG from the Fuji was the closest to the K3 monochromes raw when I was pixel peeping those. An X-Men is a consistent exposure on the Pentax. Ah, somebody is an optimist. But yes, after some time, ones get used to it a bit more. Yeah, you're a Pentaxian yourself, right? You give me a lot of good advice. I really appreciate it. Um, I can't wait for David Tellett to get back. He's a Pentaxian, and we're gonna go out and shoot our Pentax cameras one day. And hot lights and flash bulbs will give a different look than strobes and umbrellas for portraiture. Large format also makes it. Yes, I agree 100%. We're talking about the use of Karsh. I assume he shot 4x5, or I doubt he shot 8x10, but maybe he did. But I did see the lights that he uses. And I used LED lighting with Fresnel lenses for some other photos. The ones I showed in that today, I used strobes and Fresnel lenses, um, which in theory should be the same, but uh, we know when we look at them, they are different using hot lights. Because back then they used tungsten. Maybe not. I'm not going to go there. I didn't research it that much. I just saw the pictures of one of his setups, like behind the scene things. And yeah, they were using big, massive lights. Yeah, Salgado, definitely. Definitely some good stuff there. And I virtually only use my 150 handheld, no problem with weight and balance. Only tend to use the monopod or tripod with video unless I need slow shutter speed or long exposure. Yeah, if I had brought my Black Rapid strap, I forgot to bring it with me. I wouldn't have needed the monopod, but I'm not going to hand hold a camera without a strap. I'm just too clumsy for that. So I ended up using the monopod. Pentax AFC, nothing to write poems about, far from the M5. Yeah, that's what I'm feeling so far. The AFC is a little bit random. So I have the K3, tried the KP, K33, but the difference is very small over 10 years. Then I got the M53 and was amazed. All right. So you're sort of mirroring my experience, or what I've found so far, but I didn't want to pass judgment on the K33 yet, uh, until I got a feel for it. Like you said, once you kind of get a feel for the system, then I can say, yeah, like what you're saying here, the M53 is really good, you know. So right now with everything, would you invest in an OM system, OM 12, 150 to 4, well, I assume you mean the 400 Pro for wildlife, over any other system for the same price if a genie gave you a gift card? So yeah, no question for me. So if I were to take, so we're talking about 10 grand, right? For 10 grand, we're looking at uh like f6.3 zoom lenses from full frame and APS-C side. They're not going to have f4.5 lenses under 10 grand. Okay, absolutely. And I say this because not because I've shot extensively with any other system. I shot barely a little bit with the Sony. I used somebody else's Sony once with the 600, 100 to whatever their zoom lens is that goes to 5 or 600. I was not overly impressed with the images. It was an A7 IV and the Sony's 200 to 600, whatever that lens is, right? I was not overly impressed with the images that I got. Again, that had partially to do with me, right? Not being able to focus and handle the camera properly, get the right exposure, yada yada. But I got a feel for it. And there's no way I would take that over my OM1 with the 150 to 450. There's just no way I would do it. But it's not, yeah, I'm not really the best person to ask because I don't have experience with the other systems. I might be blown away by a $10,000 system with another company, one way or the other. I can't really say. But I'd have no hesitation using the OM1 Mark II with the 150 to 400. I would not feel like my money was wasted at all, even having not tried the other systems. So I know what the other systems can do with regular primes, right? I have normal zooms and primes for my A7R5, my XH2, my Nikon. Um, when I had the S1R, I have a very good feel for what the primes can do in short telephotos on those cameras. So going to a super telephoto, that's when like a Nikon Z8 is probably one of the few, and you know, the Sony A1s, the very high end. Yes, or yeah, the very high-end mirrorless cameras can keep up with the OM1 in terms of frames per second, in terms of autofocus. Um, but yeah, those bodies cost twice as much, if not more, than an OM1 Mark II. It's just, and this lens, the 150 to 400, I haven't heard anybody say one bad thing about that lens ever. Not one. I challenge anybody to find me a bad review on that lens. Um, so for like 10 grand, right? I can't think of another system. You'd have to go to a Nikon Z8 and get one of Nikon's really good zooms. I think they have a good zoom out that came out recently. Then you can compare the two, and then you're probably at a similar price point, maybe even less. But I haven't shot with that camera and lens combo, so sorry. I wish I could give you a more definitive answer. I know my money would be there, no problem. Personally, I would not hesitate, but okay. I agree 100% about the comparison of the OM1 and M1 Mark III autofocus. Yeah. So I think what I said was something to the effect that the face detect is excellent on both cameras. And if the M1 Mark III had subject detect, it'd probably be very, very close, if not exactly the same. Probably be very close to the M1 Mark I. But it's the face detect, yeah, really good on both cameras, much better than the M5 Mark III or the EM1 Mark II. The face detect part, you can get way down tiny in the frame, the face, and it'll lock on and take a picture. And John follows. Hello. Wow, it's 11 p.m. now. I'm watching the Brazil F1. Oh, wow. The Grand Prix all day. Can't keep my eyes open. Wow. And John follows, let's see, there's more here. Photo walk tomorrow with my Nikkor 100 to 400, maybe for Friday's live stream. Oh, cool. That would be awesome. And Roger's here. Roger, what in camera settings would you use for Ansel Adams like monochrome JPEG photos? Saturation, contrast to show up in the control panel. there's nothing you can do really in camera. Ansel Adams did so much in post-processing that's not possible in camera. So yeah, that there's no answer for that, unfortunately. Ansel Adams did a ton of post-processing. Um, that it's not something you can get straight out of camera, far as I know. Um, and Simpson Short says, I did have those problems with my first 150 to 400 1.25, if you recall, but OM system they did replace with a new lens, which works fine. Oh, that's right. I do recall that. But yeah, good thing they replaced it because that's not a that's yeah, it's not a cheap lens. But okay, so let's see if I missed anything here. You guys have been awesome today. Camille, I don't think I've seen this comment. Hi, I'm late, but I saw the beginning of the live. Amazing lens. I had a chance to use it too for 10 minutes and found love. Yeah, no, it's hard not to. That lens was amazing. The 150 to 400. And how's Ben's health? He's doing well. He's feeling better. He's on a new some sort of cocktail that he's handling better. So and his spirits are always good. So you wouldn't know uh he had any problems at all when you meet him because he just has such a positive mental attitude and a positive vibe that you just wouldn't know unless he told you. I mean, you can look at him, he's lost some hair and stuff, and you can guess that something's going on, but you wouldn't know from talking to him, you know. And so I'm very encouraged by what I saw when I met with him, you know. Uh, so as always, we always wish the very best. And that reminds me, Roberto Di Donato and Jerry, right? Robert and Jerry. I did reach out to him to see how the surgery went for Jerry, and it went well. Jerry's still in recovery with respect to, he's struggling a bit with getting past, whatever they did to him. Uh, so I won't say too much. I'll let Roberto make a video about it. But I think I can safely say without, you know, revealing anything personal that Jerry went through the surgery and came out just fine. But he's got a pretty hard road to recovery from there. So again, send out your prayers and thoughts to Roberto and Jerry if you get a chance to stop by his channel. Uh, your technical expertise. Oh, thanks, Signature. I try. I get lucky sometimes. Um, you always say you're not creative, and then you post some really great photos with good composition. So don't be hard on yourself. Like I said, I get lucky sometimes. I mean, certain like architecture, I'm pretty decent at, but they're very stock. I don't feel like I do any photos that are just wow. You know, when you look at the work that are done by the photography masters, and not just the masters. When I went to the show today, I went into the gallery because they have a gallery of photos that were all taken by a lot of local photographers at the show that I went to today, and there was really some amazing, amazing things. I mean, I can look at most of them and tell how it was shot, if they used lighting, uh, how many lights they use, where they put the lights. I can get very analytical about a photo, but then there's some, but that has nothing to do with the story that they're telling, the composition that they created, the way they set up the lights to give you that kind of uh the mood, right? That the lighting that they use, the mood that they I mean, there was really some really impressive images there that I just hope that I can be there one day myself, you know. Um, I'm going to be working actually with an award-winning photographer in a couple of weeks. She's won awards for something, and not small. Well, I don't know how big or small they are, but they're not tiny small awards like local photo club contests and things. But these are like a little bit more. They had a little higher recognition at some level, something to do with Sony. She's a Sony shooter, so I think she got featured in Sony. I don't know. She's kind of a big deal. She's taught classes, and but she asked me to teach her. I was like really flattered. I'm like, you know what? Don't come to my classes. Let's just get together and see what, because I look at her photos and I'm like, how could I possibly teach you anything about lighting? Because I see the photos that she takes and the lighting that she uses, right? I'm looking at, I'm like, I don't know what I can teach you, you know? And she goes, no, no, your students, because we have some students in common, right? Uh, And she's like, "No, no, I hear about you all the time, how great you are at this, that, and the other thing, and you do a lot of this outdoor photography too, and I want to learn." I'm like, "Okay, you know what? Let's just get together and see what," because I think I'm gonna learn a lot more from her than she's gonna learn from me, right? Because I said, "Your indoor lighting technique is so good. I wish I could find her images, but I said, "You're." Let me see if I can look it up because I know her name. Nope. There's nothing. Yeah, no. She has a pretty I don't wanna say her name, but it's such a common name that, like, there's a billion hits here. I'm not gonna be able to find it. No, that's some influencer. Ugh, sorry, I can't find it. And I don't wanna advertise her name at this point until I talk to her, cause she knows I'm on YouTube and stuff, and she didn't give me permission to use her name or you know how it is. I try not to cross any lines that I don't think I'm supposed to. Okay, let's see. But I'll let you know how that goes. It'll probably be after Thanksgiving that I can talk about it more, maybe even have some behind the scenes shots with her. But supposedly she has a really nice studio. God, I'm like, I wish you could learn from me. I have no idea. Because she has a really nice studio. She has students around the world. She travels everywhere. And she wants me to teach her lighting, outdoor lighting. And I'm like, it's not hard. You do indoor lighting already. I've seen your images. All you need outdoors is more powerful lights. You know, that's really the only difference. Maybe a little bit of blending of ambient light, a little more, of course, but uh, maybe use an ND filter. I mean, I don't know. I just can't believe I'm just so flattered and flabbergasted that somebody would ask me to teach them lighting, somebody of that stature. Oh, yeah, I saw an Adams pic straight from the negative, almost looked like a snapshot. Yeah. So Roger, if you Google Ansel Adams, workflow, I'm sure something will come up and you'll see how much work goes into the post-processing of the negative. And Camille says one guy did a Denmark. Why did that just drop? one guy did a comparison of the Sony A1 with the 200 600 and the OM1 100 to 400. 80% of the photos were sharper with 20 megapixels versus 50 pixels. Now he has an OM1 and a Z9. Cool. That doesn't surprise me because someone else commented on that about how sharp my photos were. Because we go to the same park and take the same pictures, and she's using 50 megapixel A1, and I was using my OM1 with 300 f4, right? And she had the 200. Okay, so it is a 200 to 6. She had the same setup, and she asked me how many megapixels are you, because she doesn't know anything about OM systems, right? She said, how many megapixels? I said like 20. She's like, you did that with 20 megapixels? I was like I said, it's not just the camera and the lens, and it's the whole workflow and the relationship you have with your camera and the location, because you really have to have a good relationship with the location, like really know it well, and when to shoot, when the lighting is good. I mean, it's a whole thing, right? It's not just go out and take a picture, and get a sharp image. It's like you have to be uh it can take years and years. I've been going to that park that we go to together sometimes for years. So I know when it's a good time to go there. And even when it's supposed to be a good time, it's still a roll of the dice. So you have to go often and practice. And then, anyway, um, but I'm not surprised that someone else is sort of is basically justifying what I was saying earlier, that I would have no problem investing in an OM1 and it's 150 to 400, just like this person did, because I've met people at the park that shot with like the Canon R5 and their Canon's super zoom, uh, and they bought an OM1 with the 150 to 400, and they're like, yeah, there's times when the Canon will do a little better job but for a lot of things, the OM1 is awesome, and it's much smaller and lighter and all of that stuff. Um, and takes just as good a picture, and that person took amazing shots. Oh, 150 to 400 Pro versus the Sony 200. Yeah. Yep, I'm with you. Uh, in case I take Sigma 18 to 35 or Sigma 17 to 50, is better to use live view contrast on the K3 to get better accuracy. The SIG 35 1.4 and FA 50 1.4 are even trickier, trying to hit eyes as hell. Really? So I only use the live view contrast when I'm still struggling with the autofocus on that too, because there's a couple of settings. Like I'll get a feel for it. But I didn't read. I heard the Sigma 35 1.4 autofocus is hit or miss. So I'm gonna avoid the Sigma 35. I was tempted by that lens because 1.4 is better than 2.8. Take it when you can get it, because you're giving the autofocus system more light, right? But I heard it's hit or miss with that. And then the FA50, I'm strongly considering though, because you can get them for like $100. The FA50, for $100, it's kind of a no-brainer. Just get it, right? Uh, but I'm thinking about the 77F 2 point. Is it a 2.8? The 77 millimeter. No, it's a 1.8. The 77 1.8 DA limited. That looks really attractive. The focal length is a little bit longer than I would prefer. I like the 70 better. The 70 makes a little more sense. The 77 would be a little bit too tight. I know it's very subtle different, but you know how it is, right? These are just weird focal lengths. But I could get used to the 77 if I get the pixie dust everybody talks about, right, with that lens. I would learn to use it. But I'm gonna hold off. I might just start with I did get the 55 to 300 PLM though. That should be in next week, hopefully. I just wanted a zoom lens. I don't need, and it's sharp enough. for 200 bucks. I got a good deal on it. Uh, that should be good enough, I think. 55 to 300, the PLM, the newest one. Um, because I could have got the previous versions for about half that, maybe not quite half, but for a lot less, right? And supposedly they're just as sharp, but the PLM is a little bit smaller too. And like I said, I'm not looking for tack sharp in that focal range for that camera. I just need a little bit more reach with it. But I think the 77, and Klaus says, I like the M1X for wildlife. The concept of an integrated power grip and two processors is cool. The OM should go for it because AI will come more and more and dedicated processor will be normal. Yeah. I would be surprised if they come out with an OM1X. But if they do, I get it. Because everything you say there is true. And because I don't know the marketing data behind developing such a camera, my gut feeling is it makes no sense to make a camera like that in the market the way it is right now. But if they feel like if they're consultants or whoever's giving them marketing advice, whether they do it internally or they hire consultants to give them the marketing data, is telling them that an OM1X makes sense, it would not surprise me. But I would be very disappointed. I would rather see an OM10, like a replacement to the EM10 series, to compete with like the XM5 or the XT50, compete with cameras like that, compete with the Canon R50, the Canon, Canon R10. We need a strong competitor to that, the Sony a6700. We need, well, I guess the OM5 is kind of there, but we need something on that level from OM systems below $1,000, right? Like Canon, Sony are doing, and Fuji to some extent with the XM5. Oh, excuse me. Interesting chat as always, Rob. Look after yourself. Get out some shutters. Okay, thanks. Um, thanks, System Mature. I guess you're heading out. Thanks for dropping in. And Roberto, hey, how are you? It's daylight and Rob Trek is. I know I was out all day shooting, so it's nighttime for me now. I don't know if this is a better time to do streams or not, but I'm getting tired. I'm gonna go to bed here in about an hour. Um, yeah, how's Jerry doing? Okay, yeah. So I did talk about Jerry a little bit. I just said that his surgery went well and that he's recovering now. I didn't say much more. I'll leave that to you, Roberto, to talk about that. But yeah, so he's getting better. Still won't eat, feeding by hand, but looks hopeful. Need time. Yeah, so it's basically in recovery. And the 70 is 2.4 is a great lens. I like it a lot. The only issue is quite long minimum focus. The FA77 is a bit it is a bit pricey. But I like the 72.4 focal length. I just wish it was a 1.8 and not a 2.4. I know we're splitting hairs. Uh, but I might take your advice and just go with the 70. I think ultimately the focal length is more important than the aperture for me. Ultimately. Because I think I would be too tight at 77 all the time. I would feel like I can't shoot at 77. The Sony full frame would need to have 80 megapixel sensor to have the same pixel density as the 20 megapixel Olympus, and Olympus is a lens-oriented company, better glass. So this is a very complicated subject, right? It's hard to explain this to people because when you say it like this, it sounds very simple, right? That we're getting more pixels on the same area in the same field of view, basically, right? So if we have a certain very specific field of view, we're getting more megapixels on that field of view than we will with any full frame camera right now. So in theory, we're going to get a sharper image, right? Because we have more pixels on it. But that whole pipeline has to be just as good, right? We have to have the lens sharp enough to be able to resolve that pixel density, which I think we have in many of the pro lenses from OM systems. Uh, but yeah, it's a little bit beyond my technical knowledge or understanding of optics and sensors to be able to simplify it down to the way you just did and say, we're getting more pixels on the same field of view, hence we should get a sharper image. And I think for macro photography, that's certainly been shown time and time again. And that's why the macro photography is very popular. OM Systems is very popular with macro photographers as well. Translating it to uh, wildlife photography, where you're shooting things at a great distance, even though you're getting more megapixels on the subject, more pixels on the same field of view, it's so far away that other factors start to come into play, right? Atmospheric distortion, things like that, to where your pixel density is not as critical, but um, you know, ISO performance, dynamic range, other things start to come into play more, where the micro four thirds sensor, you hit your limits sooner on a micro four thirds sensor because the pixel density is higher, right? So it's kind of a blessing and a curse. So you have to balance all of that, and it goes back to my whole thing about the pipeline workflow of your camera, lens, software, your relationship with your camera, and the location, the lighting, all of that comes into play. Um, but I think at the simplest level, your statement is 100% accurate. More pixels on the same field of view, basically. You would need an 80 megapixel full frame sensor to give you the same pixel density in the same field of view that a micro four thirds would. Hence, you should get better resolution or more pixels on the subject. Yeah, anyway, I'm repeating myself. I don't disagree with you at all, is what I'm saying. DL55 300 PLM is fine, small telephoto, about similar output to the Ali 75, but it needs f8 to show fine detail. Okay, so stop it down a little. The old Sigma 100 at 300 f4 is a gem if you want telephoto. Damn it. I have to look into that. But I just worry about autofocus with, I'm not seeing good reviews on third-party lenses for Pentax because of the autofocus is not reliable. Are you still using the 8mm fisheye for? No, I'm not. Have you tried the Laowa 6mm? So I stopped using the 8mm fisheye and went back to my 7 to 14 rectilinear lens. Not because there was anything wrong with the 8mm fisheye. It produced better, sharper images than my Panasonic 7 to 14 f4. The reason I switched over was the workflow. Uh, it was just almost too wide, and but it's mainly the workflow of converting it back to a rectilinear image and then exporting that. I mean, I like the ability to zoom in a little bit sometimes in the field because I'm not always wide at 7mm. Sometimes I like to punch into 9 or 10, and so that little bit of extra flexibility with the 7 to 14 is why I don't use it anymore. And I honestly I haven't used that lens in a long time. It's like one of those lenses I might use once every couple of years now, apparently. I haven't touched this lens. I probably have to go back to 2022 to see if I use that lens. unfortunately. I mean, it's yeah, but I haven't. No, I haven't tried the 6. I don't need to go wider. 7 is wide enough for what I do. Um, if you get way too wide, you know, the wide angle distortion is just too much. And I end up cropping in. So, but yeah, mainly because I could use the zoom a little more and it's rectilinear right there in camera, so it's easier for me to compose the shot. I can do it in, I can look at the rectilinear image of the 8mm fisheye in camera when I'm in the field, but I have to shoot in JPEG to see it. I don't know. I just couldn't get the workflow down as smooth as I wanted. So I went back to 7 to 14 and then added the flexibility of being able to zoom in a little bit. Like I rarely zoom in all the way to 14, but I do go 9, 10, 11, 12, like in that range time to time. But ultimately your question was, have I tried the 6mm f2? No. And I wouldn't use something like that for real estate. It's just too wide. Good evening, Lino Temis or Lenotimus. Intrigue, good to see you again, Rob. Yeah, good to see you, Intrigue. Nice to meet you today. And you're a celebrity. Oh my God, I'm going all the way back to I don't know why my chat jumps up like that. So we were on this last one, but okay, I'm gonna call it here, guys. I don't really see any other questions in the chat, so thanks so much for coming in today. I really appreciate it. It's always a lot of fun seeing everybody and talking to you guys. Uh, join my channel as a member. It's 99 cents, and support everything that I do here. It's greatly appreciated. Or you can buy me a coffee as usual. But either way, it's always a lot of fun, and I will be back probably on Tuesday for a shopping stream where we sort of everybody with gas kind of gets together and uh, you know hangs out that way because we all love gear, we all have gas, those of us that do. And then Friday I have my photo editing streams, so you can submit your images there. I'll try and put them up a little earlier so you have a little more time to figure out what to send in. But either way, you guys have a great week. We'll see you again soon.